Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jeremy, and I'm a representative of EHN Canada. We are a nationwide network of treatment centers for addiction, trauma, and mental health. We have locations across the country in British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia. We offer high-quality inpatient, outpatient, and online treatment programs. For more information, please visit our website at www.ehncanada.com. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Everyone is on mute and cameras are off for today's webinar, but please feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen to submit any questions for our speaker. We will try to get to as many questions as we can at the end of today's session. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending out a follow-up email next week that will include the link to today's recording, any useful resources, the slides that are presented, as well as your CEU certificate. I am located in Toronto. Toronto is located on the traditional territory of several nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. It is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit. We also have presence in today's webinar located at our Edgewood facility in Nanaimo, British Columbia. They are on the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, the traditional territory of the Sunimuk First Nation, and Vancouver is on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. If you're new to this work and want to find out whose land you are on or grew up on, please visit www.native-land.ca. Many more of you may be physically present elsewhere. I encourage everyone to use the chat function to, where applicable, share whose land you are on. Now, to get to today's session, trauma and mood disorders, we have Joel Hughes. Joel received his master's degree in leadership from Royal Roads University in Victoria, British Columbia, and has worked at Edgewood in a clinical supervisory capacity since 2008. Joel has worked in the counseling field for over 25 years and has an extensive breadth of experience to draw from. Joel's passion is to collaborate with individuals, families, communities, and organizations offering addiction services and education to provide the best possible treatment options and outcomes. Please help me welcome Joel. Sorry, Joel, you're just on mute.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining. This is really great to be here. I just love chatting about this kind of thing, and I like collaborating with other professionals to ensure that people can get the help and support that they need. Today, I'd love to jump in here talking about mood disorders and trauma and the interrelation between them, and then get a bit of a discussion going. Jeremy will interrupt me if there's a particular question that pops up that seems quite prudent to get going as part of the process. Otherwise, we can have some question and answer at the end. So thanks everybody for joining. So when we look at this concept of mood disorders and what they are, and we maybe look at the DSM-5, I just looked at it up there, and look at kind of how we look at all of this sort of thing. And so if you look at the next slide, we look at what is a mood disorder. So it is a psychological disorder characterized by the elevation or lowering of a person's mood. And for this presentation, we will focus on depression and anxiety. So the World Health Organization states that depression is characterized by persistent sadness and a lack of interest or pleasure in previously rewarding or enjoyable activities. And so, as you can imagine, any one of us can get depressed, and depressed makes complete sense based on what might be going on around us. There might be a life situation or something that comes up where it makes complete sense that we have a depressed mood for a length of time. That's not a disorder, that's just normally being depressed in something that is a depressing circumstance. And so what we want to look at is, over time, does somebody showing a pattern where things that used to be okay for them, the normal ups and downs of life, have flattened, and that they now become complacent and or withdrawn from all those things that they used to find good. And then a lot of times it's family and friends that start to wonder, like, what's going on? You don't seem to be bouncing back. And I think over this last couple of years with COVID, we've seen a big increase in a lot of depression and or anxiety with a lot of people who, I think what we're realizing for certain, I think we always knew this, but this really bore it out, is that when we are isolated from each other, when we are disconnected from our support groups, when we are struggling with a bit of fear and anxiety over some of the unknowns, and there's sensationalizing going on, it becomes very difficult to regulate and to connect. And often when we're left to our own devices in that sense, we often decompensate and really struggle. So I'm guessing a number of you might have stories for yourselves or for your families or other people that you've been working with that have struggled a lot more over this last couple of years with depression and anxiety. The APA describes anxiety as an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure. People with anxiety disorders usually have reoccurring intrusive thoughts or concerns. And so often we look at anxiety as fear, like what are you afraid of? What's going on? And I often go back to like the caveman wiring that's within us and think about how we need fear. Fear is a very important survival sensation. Anxiety is appropriate when we're getting the cues from our surroundings that there might be danger. The smell of a saber-toothed tiger should put us on high alert, because if we don't respect that, we could put ourselves at great risk. And so we look at that as being a normal human reaction to stressful situations. But it becomes a condition when it frequently occurs without a trigger or disproportionately to the things that are going on around us. The dialectical behavior therapy people make a really interesting statement around how every behavior makes complete sense if we're looking at it from the perspective of what that person has been through, how they arrived at their conclusions and the filter. And so that's why it requires so much extra help and talk and sharing and getting people to sort out how they arrived at the way their body's reacting. So anxiety disorders can keep you from carrying on and living a normal life, even though your body believes it's helping you. All right, next one there, Jeremy. So then we look at how trauma comes into this. So trauma creates a dysregulated nervous system. The person fluctuates between their dorsal and their sympathetic. And so again, this is really important for survival. We need to be hypervigilant and on high alert when there is danger. And then we need to re-regulate, come back down, and have that parasympathetic where we can connect. And I think that's often the trouble that we have in our society, is that as we experience trauma, especially early childhood trauma, it activates a dysregulated nervous system. It puts us into fight or flight in far too many circumstances. We have a lot of distrust and struggle. A young person doesn't have the mental capacity to sort out all that they're experiencing. They just know that it doesn't feel right. And when we're in a place where we're just uncomfortable on a regular basis and kind of having some fear and stress and anxiety about what's going on around us, we stay in this hypervigilant place where we believe that we're doing the best we can to stay safe. And that often leads to isolation, avoidance, aggression, and then of course it leads into other maladaptive coping mechanisms. We'll get that on another slide around how that leads to addiction. So the person starts to question, who am I and what's going on with me? Am I crazy? Am I broken? Why do I react the way I do? And so very often there's that disconnect with inside themselves where they're just really, really struggling to figure out what's wrong with me. People don't intend to react poorly to life. People want what's best. People lean into the solution as best they can. And when the world around them is reacting as if they're doing something wrong, it just really pushes against that self-concept, that self-esteem, and creates confusion, because internally they truly do believe that they're doing the best they can and that they're making decisions to keep themselves safe. And then it's not working out for them. Next slide. So when we look at that overall etiology of all of this, how the biopsychosocial model kind of fits into this, that yes, we can be born with a genetic vulnerability, neurotransmitter imbalance, maybe there's not enough serotonin in the system and we need help with that. the neuroendocrine functioning, elevated cortisol or other stress-related hormones, and that can be something that's biological, or it can also just be that early childhood trauma stuff that just continues to put somebody in that elevated state so that cortisol is shooting off on a regular basis and we can't regulate ourselves. And then those dysfunctional somatic responses to stress, so that, our body, I remember a book I read, I forget the author, but it was called The Body Cries the Tears That the Emotions Are Afraid to Let Out. And this idea that our system, our body, our immune system, maybe we get rashes, we get stomach aches, we have irritable bowel, we have tension headaches, all these different things that our body does to say that I don't feel right. And often that comes from just a prolonged state of anxiety that relates to the stress that's going on around us. And oftentimes what we're doing is that we are, as we're surveying our environment, we're anticipating something uncomfortable, we're anticipating a problem, and our anxiety might not always be proportional to what's going on around us. And then that's kind of where we fall into the disordered part of things. And then the people around us get scared, frustrated with us. And then we feel like we're the ones that are broken, different, something's wrong with us. And yet we want help. We want to have proportionate, but the fear is there. It's kind of like if you have a number of kids, maybe they take their, grade 1 kids and they go to a petting zoo as part of a school field trip. And all the kids run towards the baby sheep. The lambs are there and they're all, oh, wow, they're so cute. And everybody's running up to go see, but one kid kind of freaks out, starts to shake and hides behind a tree. Now, in that moment, you think, what's wrong with that kid? Everyone else is having fun. We don't realize that maybe that kid has been there before and got run over by one of the lambs that was a little over anxious or a little over exuberant, and he fell and hurt himself. And so now he's got that frame of reference that those little lambs are actually dangerous, and he's reacting to that. And a lot of times when you think about how early childhood trauma or adverse childhood experiences accumulate in a young person's brain, is they're working really hard to stay safe. They're working really hard to stay comfortable, but they don't yet have the capacity to fully grasp or understand everything that's going on around them. And so they develop these maladaptive coping mechanisms to survive as best they can. When you hear stories about a child in a very abusive, loud, aggressive home where there's lots of fighting and arguing, and they tend to hide in the back of their closet or under the stairs, they find a safe place, they take their favorite teddy bear and a blanket and they just rock in the corner. What a beautiful job that child has done to survive. What an amazing strategy they came up with in their given environment to do what they had to do to self-soothe and to be okay. But what often happens is they're too young to recognize all those different nuances. And as they age, their brain stays in that place where when they're triggered by loud noises or people fighting or arguing or certain smells, certain looks on people's faces, any kind of trigger that comes up, again, they want to retreat, they want to go hide, they want to be by themselves, and they go and do their self-soothing. But it may not be as adaptive anymore. It may not be the appropriate time or place for it, but they're being triggered into doing it anyways. And then there's the stress and the anxiety and the embarrassment that goes with somebody having a reaction that doesn't look appropriate anymore for today's circumstance, but it does make complete sense for how they arrived at the need to do that. And that's where we get all of the dysfunction. And so a lot of the patients that we're working with, probably the majority of them have had adverse childhood experiences, have had some trauma, early childhood trauma and other traumas along the way. We get into a complex trauma situation, and we are dealing with people's reactions on a daily basis here that don't always make sense in the moment, but having to come from that place of just asking them what's going on, what just happened for you, what was that trigger, what was it, a sound, was it a smell, was it an experience, where people say, well, I can't stand when people tell me what to do. Okay, well, let's, instead of just telling them, well, you have to do what you're told in order to stay, let's dig back into that. Let's get to the story about where that started and how we can help them through that and re-regulate that process. Because the body, again, cries the tears. And so we get chronic inflammation, the immune system starts to be affected, and that chronic stress just starts to crush the body. I'm sure there's a lot of you that have struggle with different tension headaches. I know I hold a lot of my stress up here in the back of my neck, and I'm a bit of a clencher and a grinder at times. And so it's about recognizing when I'm doing it, pausing for a moment, take a deep breath, shake it off and say, hey, Joel, you're doing it again. You're carrying the weight. You're pushing for a desired outcome. You're not present in the moment. Get yourself regrounded and then keep tackling what we need to tackle. And that self-talk is just so important to kind of help us. And as helpers, we have to be able to model the way. We have to be able to show people that we too are impacted by the world around us. And we too have to right-size our reactions, take a breath, regulate, and slowly move forward.
So we actually have a question, Joel.
Okay.
So if you have a family member who is exhibiting behaviors that you suspect is due to a mood disorder due to recent trauma, but they do not acknowledge, how do you address this with them to try and get them the help that they need?
Absolutely. Yeah, that can be a long and difficult journey to try and help somebody. And I think there's so much trial and error that goes into things like that. We want to be as compassionate and validating as possible, and then use that, in this field, we utilize something called motivational interviewing. I'm sure a lot of you have been exposed to that. Is what are your goals? What are you hoping? What do you see as the problem? Do you want to get through this? What are some of the strategies you've tried so far? Is there any help you think that we could do this? We could do this together. Where's your fear? Because a lot of times people don't even recognize for sure what's happening. And there's so much stigma for mental health in our society that tells people that they're broken, they're weak, they're a problem, they're a failure. And so overcoming that stigma is really important, I think, when you're first discussing this type of thing with a family member, just to love them up and to validate their experience and to walk them through how their reaction makes complete sense, but may not be getting them the overall desired results, and then helping them brainstorm a little bit of what that might take to get there and to reset their system. Sometimes you might just need to co-regulate with them. A lot of times, and I think, again, this is where the COVID restrictions have gotten in the way for this, is that oftentimes co-regulation comes from our facial expressions, from our micro movements of our face when we're listening to someone and we're intent, like trying to make sure that they understand that we're hearing them and that we're connecting with them. And it's that eye contact and support that helps someone to come back down. Oftentimes, I'm sure a lot of you have done that, where you're helping somebody that's having an anxiety attack, where oftentimes just sitting with them and speaking calmly, breathing well yourself, and coaching them to breathe with you, and then slowly get in touch with being grounded and present in this moment, can be really helpful. But when we get aggressive and we start pushing someone to get help, we may actually be tripping into that validating that we also believe that they're broken, they're failing, that they're weak, that there's something wrong. So it does take a lot of compassion and patience to slowly help sort that out with somebody.
Great, thank you so much. We also have another question. Does this apply to the affective part of schizoaffective disorders too?
I think like the schizoaffective disorders have been linked to a lot of the neurotransmitter dysregulation. And then trauma can certainly exacerbate that whole thing. And I think we have to be a little bit careful that we can't just fix one thing and then everything else goes away. But what we might be able to do is, as we help somebody get grounded, work through some of those traumas, learn some better coping skills, then maybe we can manage the schizoaffective stuff in a more effective manner.
Perfect, thank you. And then one more question. What do you do if you believe the reason for a lot of your maladaptive behaviors and anxiety is trauma in childhood, but you can't remember the trauma or deduce whether or not what you went through was actually traumatic?
Yeah, I think if we work from the assumption that just being a child is traumatic, because children do not have the brain capacity to manage all the variety of things that went on. And trauma is subjective. It's in the eye of the beholder, and there's big T traumas, little t traumas. But the accumulation of things over time also plays a big role. And I think we often get that with patients here, where they're hearing somebody else's very horrendous childhood story and they say, well, I've never gone through anything like that, so why do I have problems? And then later you find out, as you're supporting them, is that there's a number of little things that they have just got in the wrong categories in their brain. I can even share an example. When my wife and I have 4 children, and when they were all quite young, certainly there was times that, you know, we'd be upstairs having an argument and the kids would be downstairs. And it wasn't until they were young adults that they shared with us that they used to come together downstairs and huddle together and talk about, if they get divorced, who wants to go with mom, who wants to go with dad, what are we doing? And we didn't know that they were, one, we didn't know they hurt us. And 2, we didn't know that they were struggling with, like, where do we go? How does this affect us? What about our safety? And so oftentimes we don't know that we're impacting young people. And so we need to just work from that assumption that every child has come through their early childhood with some misconceptions about their own person, the way the world works, where how safety and security is sorted out, and where that self-esteem and that self-expression comes from. And so a lot of times it takes, one of the things that I often do with people is ask them to get at some of those negative core beliefs. Going through a list and recognizing, you know, do I feel like a failure? Oh, that's interesting. Do you recall the earliest memory you can come up with where you felt like a failure, or you felt like you didn't measure up, or you felt you weren't good enough? How old were you? Do you remember the circumstance? And then sometimes when we slowly work things through with people, and at the same time while we're teaching them some pro-social coping skills, things that do work for them, being able to connect with others and hear other people's stories and they can relate with each other. Often this work done in group is very effective, because when you hear someone else share a story and take a risk and have some big feelings, it might trigger a repressed memory, or bring something up, say, oh, I wonder, maybe there's something there. Sometimes we're asking questions of family members and trying to get some other collateral information. So a lot of times we have to go slow. It's not a quick process, and it's not something that there's just a quick strategy that just brings it all to the surface and everything comes out. I think a lot of times our system is protecting us as well. And so one of the things that we've noticed is, as people start eating better, drinking more water, sleeping well, getting a little bit of outside fresh air and some exercise, connecting with other humans, sharing their thoughts and feelings in a group setting, and starting to feel a little better, it's almost like the subconscious says, I think this person is now in a safe enough place, maybe I can let some of this out. And so the body starts to release some of those memories and some of those experiences or some of those feelings, once there's been enough safety and some new skills taught, and relating to other people that are going through that.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And this kind of leads into what this next slide's talking about, is the psychological factors and the cognitive distortions. Some of you might recognize, we joke about it, right? Oh, you're catastrophizing again. Now, we all do it at different times and in certain circumstances, but some people trip into it on a regular basis. And it's sad to watch, and it's hard to watch someone who is in this hypervigilant state and is stressed out all the time and is catastrophizing everything that comes along. And that idea of fortune telling, like believing that the sky is falling, the sky is falling. You see a lot of that again in today's world, where there's so many things going on, and in social media is just coming at us from so many angles, and we've got conspiracy theories piled up, and we've got all kinds of things going on, and people are already alone and struggling, and so much data is coming at them, and it just triggers a lot of that insecurity from childhood. And we've just found quite an uptick in the variety of mood disorders and addiction and people needing help since the COVID isolation stuff has kicked in. We do a lot of work here with negative core beliefs, and I really believe that it's where we need to go. When we look at some of the cognitive behavior therapy stuff, a lot of the dialectical behavior therapy stuff, it's boiling things back to my behavior always makes complete sense. But if my behavior is not getting me the desired results, I've got to look at all the feelings that are driving those behaviors. And then when I get a sense of what those feelings might be, I have to look at those thoughts and interpretations that are driving those feelings. And then what I start to realize is that I've got some negative core beliefs that are filtering the data around me, and I come up with inaccurate conclusions, which lead to the discomfort type feelings, which leads to my acting out or behaving in a way that is not adaptive. And so the work needs to be done around those negative core beliefs, that shame, a lot of those negative thoughts. I think probably a lot of us, even if we're doing fairly well in life, I know I still have some lingering stuff around my early childhood beliefs around that are still come at me sometimes around. I always tease about the movie Talladega Nights with Ricky Bobby says, if you're not first, you're last, right? I grew up in a time when you needed to be the best. You had to achieve the highest, that you were either winning or losing. And so there was a little secret spot in the back of my head that says I was failing if I didn't have the highest accomplishment. And so still today, every once in a while, that perfectionism kicks in when something happens and I feel that sudden trigger of shame. And I think I've done enough work on myself now that I can take a breath, right? I love the dialectical behavior therapy stuff. It's like, what's my current reality? Check the evidence, use my wise mind. Okay, this isn't the catastrophe. But because I've been in this field and I've done tons and tons of work on myself, it gets easier and easier to catch myself and to do that. And so I think this is one of those things where we've got to be able to teach these skills to people. And I think a lot of it is we're not going to just suddenly fix somebody. We've got to do a lot of allowing them to do a lot of storytelling, a lot of research into what those behaviors were for, what they're protecting themselves from, get at some of those negative core beliefs and slowly make shifts and show that a new behavior might also work. We're not willing to let go of a maladaptive coping mechanism if we don't have a new strategy that actually works, because that gap in between can be quite frightening. So we need to create a safe environment for people to let go of this and trust that they're going to trip over this new thing for a while until it actually starts to work. And so the social factors, adverse childhood experiences, chronic stress, and again, you know, we've got high interest rates. We've got all this external stress going on in the world right now with possible nuclear war, all these things that are coming up that, you know, every generation has had their new struggle of what's on TV, what's in the news, what activates us. Can we afford a house? I know I've got 4 adult children that believe now that they will never be able to buy a house. My wife and I bought our first house for $35,000. That kind of thing, percentage of income, it just doesn't exist anymore. And so I think we are having a group of young people that are in a much more activated state of chronic stress and fear and anxiety. And then we see the maladaptive coping mechanisms of kind of like giving up or throwing up their hands or just going and doing what's fun because hard work doesn't seem to be getting me anywhere. But then when you accumulate or when you add that on top of trauma, acute life events, or a lot of that early childhood stuff that kind of gets in the way, navigating daily living becomes almost impossible. And so as a society, we even come up with a lot of maladaptive coping skills and coping mechanisms just to continue to survive and to move forward. And we struggle. So when we reach out to others for help and they're just as sick as we are, it just perpetuates that this is going to be hard to do. Okay, next one. Yeah, so a lot of this comes back to our nervous system. And you know what? All creatures on the planet do it. I mean, a lot of you have probably witnessed that with your pets. I like using the example with dogs because they are so in tune to exactly what's going on. They pick up on energies. They pick up on all the different things that are happening. You know, they jump in, they try and distract you. If they think you're sad, they start licking your face. They want to clear up your tears. You hear about all the beautiful stories of what therapy dogs are able to do and how they can sit with people. They just sort of intrinsically know. So they are very good at helping with co-regulating, getting our nervous system back on track. And so that nervous system dysregulation is what leads to stress. And then the cortisol kicks in, and then that biopsychosocial interaction starts to happen, and we just go a little bit cuckoo just in our own thoughts. And so a lot of times we need to take that break, and we live in a fast-paced world where sometimes it's hard to do, or we believe that we're doing something wrong if we need to take a moment and go take a breath. I know that, like, we have a new puppy at home And it's an amazing thing when I've had a stressful day and I go home and and she just loves me and wants to cuddle and kiss and play. It does help me regulate back down. And then I'm actually able to do a little bit better at checking my current reality. The stress that I carried home, is it really necessary to stay tense right now? Is this something I can manage? Can I ask for help? Is it as big and scary as I thought it was? And then find out that the dog has helped me come down and regulate with that. We can do that with each other. Sometimes listening to somebody vent, we want to be cautious not to get elevated with them. It's about just hearing them out and acknowledging, like, wow, that just sounds really frustrating. Sometimes we can even do it in a playful way. I've often said to my kids, my daughter will come home, she'll share something, she's all elevated and sharing something difficult. And I say, oh, what, is there anyone I can punch for you? Right? And then she giggles and laughs and says, no, Dad. And then I just listen, and I'm not actually have to let go of my desire to fix it and do a good job at just listening and validating. And often then that's when she can slow down, her breathing slows back down, and she's more regulated again, and then able to kind of brainstorm solutions. But I know I don't make good decisions when my mood is escalated, when I'm in nervous system dysregulation. So it's not the time to make decisions. When I'm in that state, I'm running around or frantic thoughts, I need to get some space. I need to either have someone help co-regulate with me, or I need to do some breath work. I need to get myself regrounded, whatever that looks like, in order to then access the help that I need and that I can make good decisions the next. Because we're biologically and evolutionarily wired to avoid discomfort, right? It says bear in the woods here. I often go back to the saber-toothed tiger thing. Is every creature on the planet, even an amoeba, spends its entire day moving towards that which is comfortable and away from that which is uncomfortable. Every creature on the planet. I like the idea of, we've got garter snakes on the path near our house in our neighborhood. And every morning they move from the safety of the rocks to the sun so they can get warmed up. And then they go from there across to this little marsh where they can get their food. And then they're back in the sun and or back into the safety of the rocks. And so all day long, they're moving towards comfort and away from discomfort. And we're really doing the same thing. But what happens with catastrophizing when it comes from, if we're in a hyper elevated state and we've had early childhood trauma, we have an interpretation issue going on due to those negative core beliefs. And we're often seeing things that might be here on the scale as if they're here on the scale. And so our reactions, our body is in this fight or flight mode at a time when maybe it wasn't actually necessary, but for safety's sake, we are being as comfortable as possible. And very often avoidance is, who wouldn't want to avoid a saber-toothed tiger? Who wouldn't want to avoid a grizzly bear? Who wouldn't want to avoid an aggressive dog? Who wouldn't want to avoid an angry person who's yelling and screaming? All those types of things. And so if we're stuck in that emotional state and our safety and discomfort gets high enough, absolutely, we're either going to avoid or we're going to use other mechanisms. So the maladaptive coping mechanisms, for myself, the way I grew up, deflecting with humor and making sure everybody else was okay, was one way that I could protect myself from having to just sit in the discomfort of what was going on around me. And so it's those compulsive behaviors: drugs, alcohol, sex, shopping, gambling. I'm guessing there's a few of us here that have a few things arrive from Amazon and you're like, oh, I don't remember ordering that, right? It made me feel better at the time to click, 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 but it was a maladaptive coping mechanism. I remember, early on in COVID, I found myself doing that a little bit, getting on Amazon and clicking on things. And I remember getting this one item and I opened it up and it was kind of cool. And I said, wow, this looks like a lot like my other one. And then I pulled out this other one and it's like, oh my goodness, I guess I got two of them now, right? And so we all struggle with that type of thing. And yet, how far, right? Did my struggle, I was able to catch it and recognize like, oh, wow, okay, I'm doing it again. I'm finding a maladaptive coping mechanism. I've got enough internal skills and I've worked through my negative core beliefs well enough and I know how to re-regulate myself. I'm lucky, right? And so that's why we've got to reach out. We've got to help other people because we don't want our maladaptive mechanisms to derail our lives. Next slide.
We actually have a question.
Oh, sure.
So They're wondering how all of this relates to racialized or intergenerational trauma.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that just adds an added element that makes everything more difficult because it very much impacts that negative core belief stuff, which makes it even more difficult to re-regulate, co-regulate, or to have any type of trust that there's a solution or that the right people can help you. It's very difficult. So that intergenerational trauma just means that we have to work a whole lot harder to create that sense of safety, to be able to, I love that concept that we hear with the truth and reconciliation, is that we can't have reconciliation until there's truth. Truth requires that we tell our stories. And so whether that's from an Indigenous perspective or other cultures or other people that have had generational trauma and neglect and abuse, is that we've got to be able to tell our stories. So we often do that here, is just providing a safe enough environment for someone to tell their story and to just often tell it more than once, tell it in different ways. Maybe the next time they tell it, they bring in some more details. And so we've got to get to that truth. We've got to get those stories out and then slowly, slowly, slowly develop and practice new skills of how to regulate so that you can actually live a functioning life today. Because the worst thing would be to just leave somebody in that dysfunction. We want to be able to break those cycles. We want to be able to teach those skills so that they can then teach their kids those skills as well as life moves forward. So it absolutely adds a difficult component to it. But I think it is, again, just about creating safety, going slow, and providing that opportunity for those stories and traumas to be shared.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then we also have another question too. They're asking about, what is your opinion on non-evidence-based approaches to addressing trauma? There's some novel approaches that appear to be quote unquote quick fixes versus CBT and DBT, which often takes many sessions to address.
Yeah, I think for everything that we have today, probably started somewhere. And so a lot of trial and error goes into all of this stuff. And I think sometimes we trip over ourselves trying to do the perfect thing or to come up with the exact right thing, when it's a lot of times it really is about personal connection. It really is about going slow. I used to run a youth ranch facility for mostly Indigenous youth that had been in and out of foster systems and struggled with a lot of abuse and neglect. And so a lot of it is, we would just go out and work with the horses and slowly a story would get told. We go out and fix a fence and slowly a story gets told. And so I do struggle a little bit with sort of like new magic things, but I do understand that that comes from the human spirit about what else can we do? How else can we help? So hopefully, we get, once we have exciting new ideas, that we actually go through that ethically and that we try things appropriately and that we get the right systems and checks and balances in place, rather than just thinking we've invented something brand new and it's going to work for everybody. Because again, everybody's a little bit different, and somebody else talk therapy might work great. Somebody else needs it totally experiential. Somebody else needs to just sit and cuddle a puppy for a while and slowly something happens. I mean, textbooks are great too, but we have to be open to the possibilities that different things work for different people. And just because one thing works for one person doesn't mean it's going to work for someone else, and vice versa. And so as long as I believe, as long as we're behaving ethically and have the right motives, and we go slow and we're honest and we're straightforward and we're not making false promises, that we can slowly move forward and find new things that work. And I often tell patients that I'm working with is that, look, you didn't come in with a manual. I'm going to try things. I'm going to suggest things. And I want you to let me know if you think that it's helping, if it's challenging you in the right direction, or if it's something that we just need to move away from and try something else.
Perfect. And then there's a couple questions too about EMDR, if you could speak to that.
Sure. I think there's a lot of psychologists or practitioners that have had some pretty good success with it. I know that one of our psychiatrists here said that you've got to have safety first. We've got to have enough time, and we've got to have an opportunity to draw it out and to do it properly. And so it's not necessarily a quick therapy. We've moved to training a lot of our people using accelerated resolution therapy, which also uses eye movement and the bidirect, like getting the brain to switch back and forth. So a lot of those things seem to have promise and seem to do well for a lot of people. As we're shifting back and forth across the hemispheres of the brain, something cool happens. We even use the labyrinth as an amazing tool to help someone ground. And scientifically, what's happening is every time we turn a 180, we're switching right brain, left brain. I think there was a lot of that work done with brain gym, I think they called it, where you're crossing your body and helping ADHD kids in school. So there's a lot to what's going on in the brain that when we're obsessed and compulsed, we're stuck. And if we can force ourselves to switch to the other part of the brain and go back and forth, we have to let go of that. It shakes us out of that obsession and compulsion. So I think those strategies can work really well for some people. And because I think there's something to that about rewriting some memories. It's about making different associations and cleaning up some of that repetitive looping thoughts that are getting us into trouble.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
So our nervous system kind of is our, I call it like the idiot light in your car, right? It tells you that something's wrong. Our nervous system is always doing the exact right thing. But it may be that we have to let it off the hook. It's kind of like, I make a joke when I'm sharing sometimes about, let's say I was walking in the woods with a few of you, and all of a sudden I see a snake. So I screech and I jump back, and then all of you start to laugh at me because it was just a squiggly root. But from a caveman perspective, I did the right thing, because in that moment, it might have been a rattlesnake. And based on some of the other things that I've experienced before, my body needed to do that. And it was appropriate. It didn't hurt anybody. It didn't hurt me that I jumped back when I saw a squiggly root. Now, it is kind of funny. You can laugh at me all you want, but it was an appropriate response based on the data that I was carrying in my head. The difference is, am I able to re-regulate? Because right in that moment, my heart rate probably went up. I went into that fight or flight response. I was dysregulated for that moment, but it was appropriate. Once I come to terms with my current reality and survey things and check the evidence, okay, it was a squiggly root, it wasn't a snake. Do I have to go lay down for half an hour and continue to cry and panic? Or can I just laugh with everyone and say, oh, good, oh my goodness, yes, it was just a root. And that would indicate, you know, the work that I've done around the trauma, around the triggers, around what needs to be done so that I can re-regulate on a better scale to bring my reactions more proportionate. But there's nothing wrong with having that initial overreaction. And a lot of times people who have struggled with trauma, they are hardwired now for overreactions. But it's about how to recognize when they've happened, do the next right thing, get yourself regulated, find someone to help co-regulate, breathe through that, and then move forward and not stay stuck in that state and not shaming themselves or beating themselves up for having that reaction. It's okay. And so that new research on addiction demonstrates a learning and attachment component to the maintenance of maladaptive and compulsive behaviors. Compulsive behavior becomes an addiction to an arousal state rather than the behavior itself. I often talk here in our Addictions Treatment Centre that drugs and alcohol aren't actually the problem. Drugs and alcohol were the solution. And when you take away the drugs and alcohol, now you're left without a solution. You still have the problem. And so we've got a lot of work to do to figure that out and help people sort that out. And that really drugs and alcohol was meant to activate that nervous system to give you that up sense or that down sense, whichever one that you're kind of addicted to. You know, like some people are the hyper, you know, the adrenaline junkie type that's just looking for more, the cocaine addict type person who is just wants to go, and perfectionism or taking risks or driving fast or moving fast, talking fast, all of that stuff, they're addicted to that state. So when they're bored, when they're quiet, their body goes nuts. They feel that they're at risk. And so they want to get out of that state. They want to stay hyper aroused. And then vice versa, somebody else who's had too much in that realm of trauma that's come at them, that they've adjusted downwards, and they want to stay quiet. They want to stay alone. They want to be left alone. They want to be in that down state. So they're more like the heroin addict kind of person who's looking to avoid everything and stay away from everything. But either way, you're addicted to a particular arousal state, and then you're willing to jump on any activity, drug, alcohol, process addiction piece that will help you get to that state that you're looking for. And so that nervous system regulation is key to engaging in new behaviors and combating addiction. And that's where we get into all the breathing techniques, using those dialectical behavior therapy skills, walking in nature. There's just something amazing about being in nature and the type of oxygen that's available and the groundedness. A lot of people, there's some research done on gardening that just by having your hands, your bare hands in the soil, in the dirt and the minerals and the smells and the different things that are there can be extremely grounding. The smell of water, when there's like a trickling waterfall when you're in the bush and it's a creek, that type of thing can be very helpful. Living here on the island, I'm very blessed. I can go down to the ocean and just sort of the rolling waves rolling around in the kelp and the different seaweeds, it just releases something in your system that can just also be very regulating. So it's about finding those things that work for you, finding those breathing techniques that are simple and easy to do, little strategies. I've got one here in my office, a little blue sticker. And the idea is that it's a trigger for me. When I look at that blue sticker, it just reminds me to take a few slow breaths. Just pause for a moment, take a few slow breaths. Because I can be going pretty fast paced in my job, and that's when I start to feel that tension and get stressed because I'm trying. I can't help but believe that if I try harder, I'll get better results, and so I have to back off of that negative core belief and take a breath and re-regulate myself. And so the nervous system regulation is key to engaging in that. So the people can use all sorts of things, whether it's exercise, apps, health tracker. Now, anything at all that works, we can also abuse it. So there is no perfect solution. People will say, well, isn't golf better than drinking? Well, maybe, unless you're going 3 times a day and you're missing your kids' soccer games and you're not helping with homework and your partner hasn't seen you in weeks, then it's not healthier. And so we can wreck anything. Any good thing can be done in a way that is now maladaptive. And so it's not about the thing itself, it's about the intention we go in with, and it's about the way in which we use that to our betterment. And so it teaches our mind and body new ways. And a lot of that is practice, trial and error. And so in a treatment setting, because people are here for 50 or more days, we often get them, try this, see if it works. We do a little bit of yoga, we do some stretching, we do some meditating, we do some walking, we do some different mindfulness practices, and then different types of things that we expose them to quite a menu of options so that they can find the one that kind of resonates for them and works for them. And so a lot of this stuff is trial and error and practice. If you've tried yoga once and it didn't work for you, that doesn't mean that you have nothing. Try again, try different. I struggled with yoga, the classes I was going with my wife, but then I found when I did some yin yoga at home just alone, okay, that's actually what I needed, was just to be in that pose long enough for my body to slow down and to get a sense of like, what am I struggling with? What's going on for me? What do I need to learn? What's my body trying to tell me? And so we all do that in different ways, and we just need to be patient with ourselves. We need to be patient with each other, and really do that listening. So when you think about the stress responses to trauma, there are various stress responses that go with it. The hyperarousal is when you get into that fight or flight, freeze, fear, all of that stuff, all the avoidance and submission, the disassociation, right? There's all the different things that we do. Hypo is sort of that fear-based, I need to avoid, I need to escape, I need to get away, I don't know what to do. Hyper is that impulsive, hypervigilant, reactive. Often that person is angry or louder or kind of like wants to break things, wreck things. And both of them make complete sense. They both fit perfectly if you're truly in danger, if there really is a saber-toothed tiger, if there really is a landslide. You know, a lot of times it gets us when we're dealing with different things, I've often said, I think we all know that old statement that adversity builds character. And sure it does. I think we can have lots of examples of how I grew through adversity. I also throw, I forget where I heard it, was just probably dozens of years ago, but I like the statement, adversity reveals character, right? I need a little bit of duress, a little bit of stress to find out, are my skills working? Have I built my character a place where I can manage something a little bit more difficult? Because we can all sit and make great decisions on a beautiful sunny day when nothing's going wrong, but it kind of reveals what my inner character is all about under some duress. And so again, as we practice and learn and sort that out, we actually ask people to move towards those things that are uncomfortable, disconcerting, or that stress you out. Is if confrontation is difficult for you, then let's practice doing it. I'll come with you and we will talk to somebody, give them feedback, help you find your voice so that you can share what's going on. And when you're in a safe enough environment to practice those things, I remember a motivational speaker I heard once said that if it's worth doing poorly. And I just loved it. You know, it's kind of like that idea that coming in last place on a local 5K run is still a heck of a lot better than everyone else who didn't show up, right? It's whatever it takes to just slowly inch forward, even poorly, is better than not trying at all. And a lot of that comes from trial and error, which can be so difficult for so many of us because we have those negative core beliefs that if I'm not perfect, I suck, or I'm failing, or there's something wrong with me. But go ahead and get it wrong. Getting good at anything means doing it wrong for a while. I often think about those BMX bike riders or any of those X Games kind of people. To get really good at any of those, oh my goodness, they must have had a lot of broken bones and accidents and falls to get that good. They had to fail many, many times to slowly get better. Now, there might be an addiction component attached to some of that kind of behavior, but that's a different piece. All right. So when we think about our healthy behaviors, and this is where we get into needing to do a lot of practice and some trial and error and some finding those little things that work for you, and pushing yourself. Even just the other day, my wife came into the bedroom on Sunday and said that she really wanted to do something. In that moment, I was kind of like, well, it's Sunday, it's already almost noon. There's not enough time to go and do anything super fun because, you know, I've got to get ready for work tomorrow. But I had to push myself. I had to like, okay, you know what? This makes sense. And so we went over to a little island and had a picnic, had our dog with us. And what a beautiful time. Very regulating, very beautiful time together, just very relaxing. But in that moment, I didn't want to do it. And so sometimes it's about pushing ourselves and doing that next right thing, even though there's something in us that is resisting that. And slowly we develop patterns and routines that work for us. And so we've got this checklist at the bottom here is that, you know, I have a responsibility to my own regulation to eat a fairly healthy diet, get a little bit of exercise, and it doesn't, we don't have to overdo anything. We don't have to like, oh, I have this special diet that I do now. It's just, I think we all know what it looks like to eat a fairly balanced nutritional meal and a little bit of exercise just to get that little bit of fresh air, doing a few things, practicing some grounding exercises, sitting on the side of your bed when you first get up, even just 3 cleansing breaths, or if you do square breathing, or if you like practice, Google it, just Google all kinds of breathing techniques and find the one that you think is fun. Find the one that works for you. It could be a mindfulness practice. It could be prayer and meditation. It could be just going for a walk and just sharing your intentions for your day. It's just having any little thing that you can do and then pausing throughout the day to just redo some of that. I find that I can do a quick breathing exercise. It takes me 38 seconds. I mean, of course I have 38 seconds. So there's really no excuse at the end of the day for not having done it. And then it's just those pro-social interactions. I need to hang out with the right kinds of people. I need to be around others that kind of get me or doing the same type of work, that have my best interests at heart and know that I've got their best interests at heart. We've got to hang around the right kinds of people so that we can stay wired into that. And we also talk about touch, good touch. We live in a world today where we're so afraid of touch, but healthy touch is just absolutely so important. It releases that oxytocin that really keeps us alive and keeps us going. Again, that's why I just love going home and my puppy just jumps in my arms and wants to cuddle and just have that touch. My grandson, when he comes over, even if just he wants to wrestle and play and be rough and be silly and build forts and roll all around, and half the time, he's got me in the eye, or he's got me here, but just that touch feels so good. Or just giving somebody a really great hug, just hugging my wife when I get home, or kissing her on the forehead when I go to work, or just even like I am kind of a touch person. So even when somebody kind of gives me a punch or an elbow, it's like, oh, cool, they noticed me, they see me. It just feels good, to be able to have that. And so how do we do that? Let's not let the unhealthy element of touch take good, healthy touch away from us. And then that's why we need to implement boundaries with our unhealthy relationships. We don't need people in our lives that just constantly, I really much preach against obligations. You're not obligated to put yourself in an unsafe or unsavory situation. You're not obligated to hang around people that are going to completely drain your energy and activate all of your stuff that you just don't feel good. We've got to be able to set healthy boundaries. We've got to be able to hang around the people that help us. I forget who coined the phrase that we become like the 5 people we hang out with the most. So we've got to pick wisely. And then identify small areas of your life that cause stress and brainstorm ways to reduce getting overwhelmed. It could be as simple as when you go shopping. If you're a person who, based on trauma, based on other issues, gets stressed in noisy and crowded places, then go pick your times to go shopping at, you Google any store nowadays and it will have that little graph that'll tell you when they're busy and when they're less busy. Pick one of the less busy times. Sometimes I love to go grocery shopping at 10 o'clock at night sometimes, because almost nobody's there. You can just slowly move around and you don't feel that rush and people banging into each other in long lines and all of that stuff. And it's just less stressful. And so it's about, how do you set your life up in such a way that you're not exposing yourself to unnecessary stress, anxiety, or expectations? How do you just rearrange things that absolutely still work for you, that are more adaptive? So when we think about those maladaptive behaviors that are more likely to reappear if the goals you set for yourself are too lofty. So this is that idea of small steps, little steps, incremental steps. Small goals create big goals. When we have an accumulation of little goals, we start to achieve greater things. But I think, again, with our negative core beliefs, we've been taught in our culture, our society, to just go for it, jump right in, get the great result, do this big thing. And so I get really impressed by people who can just slow and steady, make one decent decision after the next, and slowly get where they need to go, because oftentimes that is a much stronger and more powerful foundation that keeps that longevity. It's kind of like when you think about New Year's resolutions, when you think about how many new gym memberships get sold early in January, and by mid-February, people aren't going anymore. We meant well, but it was, there's no way that I'm going to go from a sedentary life where I'm not doing anything to going to the gym 5 times a week, right? It just doesn't usually stick when we try to bite off more than we can chew. And so it's accountability partners. It's my wife does great walks with a group of women that they call each other, and on any given day, one of them might not feel like going, but they kind of push each other and support each other and encourage each other, and then they go for their walks. And so any type of accountability group, whether it's about recovery around addiction, whether it's just around moods, or just healthy, supportive people who've got your back, that are just going to tell you the truth and just kind of really help you with things. And then, or going to therapy, just getting stuff out. I encourage all of our counselors and therapists to go to therapy on their own as well. I still go to therapy, and I find it just really helpful. Just I go once a month and I just sit down with my therapist and just say what I need to say, let her kind of push me and question me on things, and I'm able to process things without it being attached to a meaningful relationship where they might have an agenda. And so a therapist is really great at not having an agenda other than just supporting you and walking you through your own process. And that's where I think change can happen. And then learning to live in the present moment. What an amazing thing that so many of us have such a difficult time doing. And I know I can get caught up. I could be obsessing about a mistake I made, or a shoulda, woulda, coulda, or I get into running scenarios in my head of how to handle something I've got coming up tomorrow or the next day. And then I have to catch myself that, oh, my heart rate's going up. I'm feeling a bit of that stress. I'm doing it again. That's maladaptive. Take a breath. What's right in front of me? I just need to be in that present moment. And so practicing that mindfulness on a regular basis to ensure that we can stay grounded and that we can do what we need to do. All right, so that's about an hour. There's a lot of stuff there that you guys can read. You can Google a lot of this stuff and get some more information. Is there any other particular questions anybody have?
There is one question. We do have time for one more. So this one was coming up quite often. How do you define a process addiction?
A process addiction is when it's not related to drugs or alcohol. It's not a substance. It's a behavior that we get into that still puts us into that mode that we're looking for. So it can be things like disordered eating, it can be shopping, it can be gambling, it can be sex, it can be cleaning, even collecting interesting, weird things to the place of obsession and compulsion. And so it's a behavior that we're obsessing and compulsing about with the belief that it's going to reward us with that exit, whether it's the adrenaline we're looking for, the endorphins we're looking for, the dopamine we're looking for, or that more of that downward kind of mood. It's anything that we do that is sort of distracting or avoidant that comes to a maladaptive place. And we can all do it to some degree, and then it can become a disorder for some.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the clarity. Like I said, unfortunately, that's all the time we do have, but just to echo what everybody said in the chat, Joel, thank you so much for the informative and insightful presentation, making it personal, bringing in like everyday resources too. I think a lot of people, myself included, really benefited from this. So thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great day, everyone.
And to everyone that attended today, thank you so much. We will be sending out a follow-up email sometime mid to late next week with a copy of today's recording, the slides that are displayed, as well as some additional resources, including your CEU certificate. Until then, we'll see you soon. Take care.